Mr. Xie Yao Quan.
Madam, last year I spoke about our social compact. And so I'm glad to hear the finance minister say that this year's budget is a first step in renewing and strengthening our social compact. Renewing and strengthening our social compact. Precise choice of operative words and a profoundly important aspiration. And today I wish to offer 3 key reflections. First, a renewed and strengthened social compact must be about the state playing an even more activist role in healthcare to ensure quality and affordability for all. And we have to find a way to fund this. Over the years, we have invested billions in our public healthcare system because we have decided early on that quality and affordable healthcare would be a key pillar in our social compact in Singapore. And because we cannot rely only on the free market to achieve this, the government has been playing an activist role. To have kept that commitment and stayed the course, investing billion after billion, year after year, this is something that should not be taken for granted. Yet, as we look ahead, we need to do even more. This is because our future healthcare challenges will be different, and amidst these challenges, Singapore must continue to be a nation where all Singaporeans can aspire to take good care of their parents while providing for the best for their children, and where every Singaporean can have basic peace of mind for him or herself. More advanced diagnostics and therapeutics are becoming what we call standard care. Take total knee replacements, TKRs. These can drastically improve quality of life, as patients who have actually gone through TKRs would know. And TKRs are indeed becoming more and more common. But the real cost of a TKR is thousands of dollars. And the question is, how can we help all Singaporeans who need a TKR and opt for one in future to afford it? Take cancer as another example. In my house visits, I've met many residents, either in remission or even on active treatment and management. They show that it is now possible to live well with cancer because of incredible advances in cancer care. But again, there's a real and high cost. So how can we help all Singaporeans and their caregivers and their loved ones to afford such life-giving care if cancer finds them one day? There are many other examples, inevitably with many more seniors with advances in standard care. In the years ahead, we must spend much more on healthcare, billions more. And so based on that scale of what is needed, some levers of revenue generation on their own are simply not going to be enough. In this budget, the government is sharply increasing tax on the highest-end properties, but this will only raise a few $100 million more each year, not the billions that we need. So realistically, 2 key levers that can meet our needs come to mind. 1, GST, and 2, the contribution of returns from investing our reserves, or what we call NIRC. A higher NIRC means we take more of the investment returns to spend today and plow less of these returns back into future investments for future returns to benefit future generations. Today, the NIRC rate is 50%. And if we increase NIRC to, say, 60%, we can raise enough to fully fund future healthcare. Now, this was a specific suggestion by Mr. Louis Chua yesterday, who, by the way, I think made a very good and insightful speech. So increase NIRC to 60% rather than raise GST. That is the suggestion. And I've heard a compelling argument for this. It goes something like this. The younger generation wants to earn its own keep and is capable of earning its own keep. And so the money that's available today, let the older generation spend it and make full use of it today. No need to save it for us, no need for the older generation to leave anything behind. And many kids today would tell their parents the same. But parents will want to leave something behind for their children. It is who parents are. It is a basic instinct, a basic desire. Parents want to gift a legacy for their children. And in my view, it should be the same for a country's finances. Each generation must want to leave something behind for generations that follow. Our forefathers have left much behind for us. It is the most precious thing, and Singaporeans should carry this on. And so I think the current 50-50 formula for our NRRC is just right, and we should resist the urge to spend more of NIR today, leaving less for tomorrow. On the other hand, for GST, because and only because of the specific way in which GST has been designed here in Singapore, I believe that increasing GST is the fairest way for us to raise the revenues that we need. It is the fairest way because a large proportion of GST, more than half of GST, is paid not by the average Singaporean, but by foreigners working and living here, by tourists visiting Singapore, and by a minority of Singaporeans who spend more. So all of them contribute to most of the GST. We then take some of this to return back to most other Singaporeans a portion, if not all, of the GST that they pay, and whatever GST revenue is left for the government in this way, the net GST revenue we spend on healthcare for all Singaporeans. In other words, if we look beyond the theoretical nature of consumption tax as being regressive and an undue burden to the middle and low income, if we look at the specific design of GST here, where non-Singaporeans and a small portion of Singaporeans, some high-spending Singaporeans, pay most of the tax that we then use to benefit all Singaporeans, and where we return the GST paid by the middle and low income to make the tax effectively progressive. If we look beyond the theory and recognize the uniquely Singapore design of GST here in practice, we can conclude that it actually works for all Singaporeans. And therefore, we should really be looking at our GST system as a lever of first resort in our fiscal toolkit, rather than a lever of last resort, as it is being framed, I think, from time to time in this House. Now, to be clear, I am not saying that we cannot and should not do more on other levers, like personal and corporate income taxes. Mr. Louis Chua has also raised salient points about these, and I agree with him. We can do more, and I do hope that the government will do more in good time. But my basic point is to let's look at all our revenue levers as a whole mix and recognize that we are already moving on property and personal income taxes as part of this mix, but at the same time, higher GST must also be an essential part of the same mix. And in fact, because of the way in which we have designed it, GST should be a lever of first rather than last resort in the mix. Getting this consensus right is important for a renewed and strengthened social compact. Madam, in Mandarin.
今年财政预算案里最受关注的莫过于消费税的上调。若要剖析此举的利与弊，就得先洞悉我们独特的消费税制度的基本原理。在其制度下，纳税的很多是外籍人士以及旅客，那纳的税也是总税额的一大半，所以我们的消费税制度堪称一举两得。一，从国人以外得到可观的税收； 二，又在单单国人的身上花这一笔税收，尤其是在医疗方面。所以我们的消费税制度其实是站在国人这一边的，他是朋友，不是敌人。再加上政府的一系列援助措施，对于中低收入国人的冲击将会减到最低。Madam, my second reflection is that in this social compact, those with more will be contributing even more to support those with less even more strongly. The higher taxes on property, luxury vehicles, and top individual earners send a strong signal that in our social compact going forward, those with more will contribute even more. At the same time, those with less will get even stronger support than before. In terms of cushioning the impact of GST, this budget provides both transitional and permanent support, which, when added up, amount to a very significant level of support, perhaps the most in our fiscal history. I did the sums. Based on MOF's example, for a typical lower-income family, couple, 2 young children in a 3-room flat, husband, sole breadwinner, they will receive $5,010 under the assurance package from 2022 to 2026. But this is only the transitional support. If we include enhancements to the GST voucher scheme, which is permanent and permanently helps Singaporeans with higher GST, then for the same period from 2022 to 2026 alone, the couple will receive an additional $1,800 in GST voucher cash. Actually, the absolute cash amount is more than $1,800, but the incremental alone is $1,800 thanks to enhancements to the scheme. And on top of that, around $590 in S&CC rebates, which have also been made a permanent feature of GST vouchers. So transitional support and permanent enhancements combined, this typical family will receive additional support totaling almost $7,400 over the next 5 years. Very significant. Another example, an elderly couple retired in a 3-room flat, the total additional support they will receive for the next 5 years comes up to $9,200. Very, very significant. And I think a very strong signal of how we are strengthening our support for those with less. Another major move is enhanced workfare. Workfare is effectively a negative income tax for those at the bottom. It makes our personal income tax regime highly progressive, and what this budget does is to enhance workfare to make the overall regime even more progressive. Specifically, a 50-year-old getting $2,500 per year in workfare support today will get $3,600 per year in future. A 30-year-old young worker who has not been eligible for workfare today will get $2,100 per year in future. And all persons with disabilities under the age of 44 who have been getting $1,700 per year today at the lowest tier of workfare support will in future get the highest tier of support at $4,200 per year. These are major advancements for those with less. In fact, coupled with the progressive wage model, which essentially is about getting the whole of society to chip in to supplement and uplift wages at the bottom, when this progressive wage model works alongside workfare by the government, the combined boost in gross wages for our lowest wage workers will be almost $1,000 every month by 2025. This is, in my view, an overdue, but nonetheless a decisive move that will profoundly transform jobs and lives at the bottom and form a key part of our renewed social compact. On this note, I also urge the government to consider raising the chargeable income ceiling for zero-rated personal income tax bracket from $20,000 today to 30,000 in a future budget to ensure that our tax regime continues to keep pace with wage developments and stay progressive. Madam, my last reflection is that a renewed and strengthened social compact is not and cannot be about asking only those with more to contribute. It cannot be about what can you give to me, because all of us, we are in this together. And so even while those with more will contribute even more in future, we must be careful not to take it to the extreme. We will have a very different ethos if we devolve into a state of what can or should you do for me. Hence, everyone pays GST, and we put in place large transfers to achieve net effects, but the same GST rate applies to everyone in the first instance, rather than a tiered system or a system of exemptions by segments, by categories at the outset. I think it sends an essential signal that in the first instance, we are all in this together. Now, a related issue here is rising prices. Cost of living is a very real concern. And yes, a small minority of businesses may be using GST as a pretext to raise prices, perhaps even ahead of the hike itself. But the reality is there are many other forces apart from GST pushing prices up. And in fact, there are many businesses as well who are trying their best to absorb what they can, even as they have no choice but to pass on some of the costs to consumers by charging higher prices. But we are all in this together. And so I hope that on cost of living concerns, all of us, consumers, businesses, workers, government, can recognize the part that everyone else is playing to help address the problem. And I urge the government to continue monitoring the situation closely and provide decisive support as necessary, even beyond this budget. But let's start with all of us seeing the cost of living issue objectively and quite apart from GST factors, because ultimately we have to refrain from making GST a straw man or a convenient scapegoat, stopping us from doing what we ought to do as a people. We can address both GST and rising prices with separate, appropriate measures, and this is what this budget has done exactly. Madam, to conclude, I've laid out how in renewing and strengthening our social compact, healthcare will remain central, and why raising GST in our uniquely Singapore design is the fairest way ahead, and how, while those with more will contribute even more, ultimately, we all need to be in this together. Actually, on further reflection, another key phrase by the finance minister struck me, and that is that this budget is the, and I quote, first step. So it means there are more steps to come. What steps then, we may ask? Well, it may be future policy moves in the same direction, but I believe that a key step, or indeed steps going forward, must be the discourse that we have. The discourse that we have on these very important issues. The discourse, the process, beyond policy pronouncements, are key steps ahead in renewing and strengthening our social compact. As fellow members have said, it will show who we are and what we value. And to this end, I hope our discourse ahead can be based on facts, where we explain and correct misconceptions where we must, instead of propagating and reinforcing these. I hope our discourse ahead will recognize and be rooted in our own local context, where examples of other countries are thoughtfully analyzed and interpreted. And above all, I hope our discourse ahead will seek to elevate us collectively to an ever more mature, more inclusive democracy. Raising taxes is one of the hardest things to do for any government. If the alternatives are really so straightforward, this government must be mad to want to press on with GST. I think Singaporeans understand deep down that all options have been fully considered, and raising GST is necessary. Alongside other levers, of course, but raising GST is necessary. So let's focus our discourse ahead, our next steps, on how we can make this work. on what else we can do, on how we can all play a part using this budget as a first step. And that, I think, will make for a truly renewed and strengthened social compact that all Singaporeans can be proud of. Madam, I support the budget.